Hi, everyone, and welcome to the special interview today. But before we dive into today's exciting interview, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Books to Life Marketing, the team making it all possible. They specialize in helping authors bring their stories to life through expert publishing, marketing, and media exposure. They're behind some of the most inspiring author journeys we've seen. If you're an author looking to elevate your book, Books to Life Marketing is the partner you want in your corner. And our guest today, I'm really excited to bring onto the program today is Griff Ruby, and Griff wrote a book called Dogmatic Ecclesiology Applied to Our Times. Thanks again, Griff, for stopping by. How are you?
Well, I'm doing as well as I can. Just given my recent runny nose, but I think I'll be all right here.
All right,
I'm
fantastic. So many
off.
Catholics wrestle internally with doubt, but hesitate to voice it. What would you say to those feel something is wrong but fear the consequences of questioning church authority?
Well, I, I think we have to kind of back up a little bit because there's an assumption at the basis of that whole kind of question, and I think the assumption itself is a mistake because it is, you know, certainly Christ did found the church and he imparted authority to that church. That's how it exists as a society and has done so literally from the time of the apostles to today. You take away that, and well, there's a passage that says if the shepherd is struck, the sheep will be scattered. So the shepherd, in terms of the earthly shepherd of the papacy specifically, has in fact been struck. And so that's why we see some degree of scattering of the sheep. So the full title is Sede Vacante, which means seat is vacant. The chair is vacant, namely the chair of Peter. You
Mhm.
see, you can have somebody pretending to sit in there, and maybe they dress up like it and other things of that nature, but somehow all of that has not resulted in somebody who speaks with the voice of Peter, Saint Peter, and that's a very strange and historically a very exceptional circumstance that has been, well, it's just nobody's really seen anything quite like it before.
No, I agree with you. And the reason is
So given
because
that, yeah,
Mhm.
so given that, the real question is, are these people really, do they speak for Peter or not? If they speak for Peter, they would be authority, and then that should be, it's it, aye, chief, off you go. But if they don't speak for authority, then, then first of all, it doesn't make much sense. And second of all, they won't have the divine protections that keep them from teaching people to go in the wrong direction in a lot of ways. And that does arouse suspicion. So I think the suspicion is something based on something very real and substantial, which, I care to document in my books. Okay, there.
No, absolutely no. So I wanted to because I have a background. I read the Catechism of the Catholic Church 4 times through. Used to be a devout Catholic. Wouldn't say I'm a little bit out of that realm now, more spiritual than I was before. So this is going to be a really good conversation because I can see it from both perspectives. The problem is if you study the Catechism of the Catholic Church, then you study the Bible, and this is you basically see a lot some things that are right and some things are like, really, this is what the catechism teaches, but really not the Bible, and really
See,
not go sorry.
occurs to me as you keep saying Catechism of the Catholic Church. Are you talking about that one that was published back in the 1990s and so forth?
Yes.
Okay. Well, already it's a bit mistitled because it's a catechism, not exactly of the Catholic Church, but of a whole society
After
that has
as at Vatican
vaguely
II,
sort of
Vatican
pretended
II
to
on.
do it.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
basically the whole Vatican II on. And so I think it's kind of a relevance to talk, well, what is wrong with all of that? Why is this whole Vatican II thing? I mean, and people like, oh, hey, I can have a mass in English, so I know what they're saying. Well, yeah, but they changed the prayers. They don't pray for the same things. They don't teach the same things. They don't believe the same things. And ultimately, there really is a very major problem, totally at the heart of this whole thing of what went wrong at Vatican II. And I was thinking maybe this would be a good place to squeeze this in. Just a little quote from, actually, this exists exactly as here. It's in a somewhat different form. When we talk Sede Vacante, we're looking at volume 1, which talks about the dogmatic ecology. I'm having a problem saying it. Dogmatic ecclesiology applied to our times, because that's volume 1, and
Yeah.
then there's also volume 2, where the idea is to explore the various theories, hypotheses, scenarios
Yes.
by which Catholics who have been devastated by what happened from Vatican II onward
Oh my
are trying
goodness.
to explain what happened. How
Right.
can they
Well, how
open
did it
themselves
change?
to each other?
Yeah.
Yeah. How
And
can you
so
do
I,
this
I
thing?
I
What
was
can
part of
you
Vatican II when I converted to the
Yeah.
Catholic Church for my ex-wife,
Mm.
my first for my ex-wife, and I basically did it on my own. Went through the process, really just enthralled myself in education, learning. But ultimately, I look back to before the Baltimore Catechism as more of an accurate catechism than the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the next one, because it kind of tried to.
Bingo. You're right. You got it. You're sensing it already, you know?
Yeah,
I'm
because
impressed.
ultimately, if you studied and you say the one true church, it's the Catholic
Yeah.
Church. What they
Yeah.
created afterwards has formats of it, Vatican II, but it got rid of a lot of the different things. The Mass in Latin was just because certain people weren't educated enough to want to learn Latin, and Latin was very important in the prayers and the specific things, and a lot of
Mhm.
it has stemmed from specific things. So I,
Okay.
I understand what you're saying, but that really kind of messed up a lot of the devout Catholics to want to stay with the church. Even the
Yeah.
last two popes after Benedict, we have seen a decline in what the Catholic Church was teaching from
Yeah.
before. And we're starting to see the conservative Catholic Church come back, and now that's disappeared.
Well, with the spirit of that conservatism, but I think we also need to, really seek to arrive at the destination. A vague leaning in the right direction doesn't necessarily mean you get where you need to go. Now,
Right.
I have a little quote here. This comes from the specifically as worded here from the audiobook draft of my volume 2, which isn't published yet. I have the script here, but I don't have it published yet as an audiobook. And I'm going to read this. What is really the main problem with the whole Vatican II church, so-called, and revolution? And it goes like this. The whole problem of the Novus Ordo religion and Noah's new order has to do with the fundamental and irreconcilable conflict between good and evil, God and Satan. Throughout Holy Writ, the pagan gods of the non-Israelite nations are but mere idols, false gods, gods of no real power, gods made by men for their own selfish purposes. But behind those false gods, there are the demons, devils, the ancient pagan deities called out in the Bible, Baal, Ashtoreth, Dagon, Moloch, and so forth, are in fact incognitos of the devil and his demons. For example, Psalm 106 or 105 in the Douay Rhymes translation, verses 35 to 38 read, "And they were mingled among the heathens, and learned their works, and served their idols. And it became a stumbling block to them, and they sacrificed their sons and their daughters to devils. And they shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and their daughters, which they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan." So this belief does not change in going to the New Covenant and Testament. St. Paul makes this clear in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 20, that the things which the heathens sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would not have it that you would be made partakers with devils. The same also applies to heretics and schismatics when he writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 3 and 4, "But I fear lest, as the serpent seduced Eve by his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted and fall from the simplicity that is in Christ. For if he that cometh preaches another Christ, whom we have not preached, or if you receive another Spirit, whom you have not received, or another gospel which you have not received, we fear you might well bear with them." So in every writing of every ancient father, church doctor, all the approved Catholic theologians, the popes, the councils, including even the many various lesser synods, every catechist even, the same opposition is always specified. And it is that which the Novus Ordo religion turns precisely on its head. The various false pagan and heathen religions, all the sects and heresies, all the false Christs, false spirits, and false gospels created by selfish men are motivated by the devils. And yet, per the Novus Ordo, they represent incognitos, not of demons and devils, but of the true God. Why is it considered acceptable to pray together with all manner of Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, animist, voodoo, and so forth, along with heretics and sectarians of every stripe, unless they too worship the true God, even the same Christ, the same Spirit, and the same gospel? Is that not what Vatican II is all about? As the Apostle Paul directly went on in 1 Corinthians, verse 21, you cannot drink from the chalice of the Lord and from the chalice of devils. You cannot be partakers of the table of the Lord and of the table of devils. How does an action go from being the divinely established crime of communicatio and sacris, which is to say communion and sacred things or holy things, to being a praiseworthy ecumenical venture? How can these false sects and religions be seen as being of the same salvific benefit to souls unless the satanic deities they serve are anything but incognitos of the true God? That Satan is essential to the salvation of at least some persons. By that standard, one might as well add the devil on as the fourth person of the Holy Trinity, or else damn that Holy Trinity for not being willing to get all warm and fuzzy and heretical and syncretic and ecumenical with all the other false gods or devils, not being willing to share a pantheon with them as their mere equal or even worship them as his superiors. It is this particular inversion which lies, and it does tell lies, at the very heartless heart of the whole Novus Ordo religion, and what most directly sets it apart from all real and authentic Catholicism. Sorry, I had to go on my soapbox there, but that's it right there.
No,
That in a nutshell.
and see, and I hope I'm taking you in a different, veered you in a different direction than you expected in this interview, but it's really showing why you wrote this book,
Yeah,
correct? So
that is it.
ultimately, the why, let's talk about that why factor. And I'll get to some of these questions, but I think that really for people that want to read this book, what's the why of reading of this book?
Okay. So, I mean, I'm writing that book to encourage the traditional Catholicism. And here's the thing, there's a wonderful miracle that has been happening underfoot. And, you know, the Sede Vacante, book that we are talking about most specifically is kind of the middle volume of what I have now as a kind of trilogy. The first one was what I called the resurrection of the Roman Catholic Church. And this actually gives a lot of the actual history of the survival of the real Catholic faith in in what's known as what I call the traditional Catholic community. There's a variety of different orders and communities that have preserved the true mass, the true catechisms, the true faith, and have just refused to have anything to do with all this, ecumenism with all the other religions out there and so forth. And this community is a very real and solid and identifiable community, despite some of its own inner struggles and so forth, because, as I said before, in the absence of the shepherd, the sheep are scattered, but they can be pulled together because they are the sheep. And ultimately, I firmly believe will be. And anything I can do to contribute to that, I intend to. But meanwhile, you've got this survival of the real Catholicism going on simultaneously to the fact that that great big church that had once been the Catholic Church has ceased to be that somehow. And I talk about that how mostly in volume 2. So once that ceases, it's, well, what happened in England when they decided to sign, when every cleric was ordered to sign I don't know, what do you call it, a declaration, which basically made the King of England their Pope. Things started changing. Things started going crazy. In fact, a lot of the same ways. I mean, you could barely tell, Episcopalian or any other high church
Right.
Protestant
You're
from a
so you're
Latin
really
or an English Novus
exactly.
Ordo.
So you
Yeah,
look at all these other churches that spun off. You're seeing Vatican II as another way of a spin-off of the real true
exactly. It
church,
is a spin-off, pure and simple.
of the first church, the true
Yeah.
teachings. I'm not saying I'm being a
Well,
journalist
some
in
break
this point,
directly off.
but that's what I'm pretty much saying. So basically in this book, you're highlighting this stuff. You said there's new communities out there. I mean, there's still communities. I know there are a lot that still go do the Latin Mass. That's
Yeah.
definitely in every city in the country. All right, so we've been talking to Griff Ruby about the book, and I've been so impressed. Your book comes out after your first book on the subject, namely the resurrection of the Roman Catholic Church, and your third, which would be Sede Vacante, part
Yeah.
two. Where does this present work fit within the context of your other books?
So, yeah. So the Sede Vacante, both volumes are describing, let's just say, the theological, canonical, ecclesiological aspects of what I had to say in my resurrection book. But the resurrection book, other than some kind of general description for the absolute general reader, is history. There's this priest here and that bishop there, and this community of Catholics here and there, and they're doing these various things to keep the faith, and what motivates them, what keeps them going, even some ways kind of in the dark. And they have to proceed with care and caution. It's kind of like you can run through an obstacle course in the daytime without a problem, but trip over your own furniture in your own living room when everything's dark at night and no lights are working. It's kind of like that. So what I kind of want to do is turn the lights on. So now the Sede Vacante volumes being about what is the teachings, what are the Catholic teachings? So in volume one, I've documented that in detail. Normally the kind of stuff that would be footnoted is right there in line in the text. You just read through. By the time you get to the end of it all, you know what the church teaches. Now, those are the doctrinal facts and the historical facts. Now we get to the second volume, and this is where we have to look into theories, ideas, scenarios. What happened? How could this happen? You've got this infallible church, indefectible, and despite an enormous amount of historical currents of history and things like that, it stayed right the same, always the same throughout it all. Now all of a sudden there's this Vatican II thing and everybody's going in all directions, just like that. How did that happen? You'd be surprised at the tremendous variety of things that people come up with, including a very big one that was kind of famous in the middle 1960s. People were even asking, even on the cover of Time magazine, is God dead? Because
Right.
it was like God was holding it up,
Yeah.
and suddenly it's like he's not holding it up anymore. What happened?
And then Griff, when we were talking in this podcast before, earlier, really diving into specifically enough how Vatican II just really changed the real mindset of what the Catholic Church is about and took a 180 in a direction you wouldn't even imagine compared to other Christian faiths to kind of mirror them in certain aspects. A lot of people just didn't understand that. And if you go back in our conversation, you will see, especially if people just tuning in at this time or other times, they'll see ultimately this is the problem. This is the crux of the problem. If this is the first universal Catholic Church that absolutely flipped in so many aspects to this level, how I'm used to the Mass in Latin, I'm used to the prayers being this way, and they all change to similarly sound like Protestant in certain aspects.
Yeah, sometimes I'd have to say I wish they could even sound that good.
But that's the thing. It's like, and we're seeing this today ultimately in the Catholic Church with our current Pope. And we can go into more of what we expected in the last two popes compared to where we're seeing a direction with Pope
Yeah.
John Paul II and Benedict going back from pre-Vatican II. Would you agree that? Go ahead.
I don't see them really going back. Most that can be said, especially John Paul II and also Benedict XVI, is they were continuing to allow what had been there. Now, but this now gets into the details of the theory. So what is my theory? So, in every schism of a church, there's something official that marks it. Like for example, the Eastern Schism of 1054, the patriarch in Constantinople suddenly decided, I'm not subject to the Pope. All of us are just separate
patriarchs over various churches in various areas, none of us above the other, anything like that. And so, and he wrote a letter to the Pope to that effect. And so that made it official. Now, what he did just changed the status of every bishop and priest and individual lady and nun and monk, for that matter, that had been under his authority, have been transferred, as it were, out of the church and into this brand new society coined in that moment. All it took was a declaration from basically a schismatically minded person to declare the schism officially, and there it was. So Vatican II was a similar kind of declaration. It basically declared that we're not going to be the church officially. We're just going to be some society in which it subsists, but there's parts of it that are outside and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, that's like saying, well, Israel isn't the only kingdom of God back in the days of the Jews. Some of God's kingdom is now going to be among the Canaanites and among the Ammonites and the Ebionites and all these different, whoever surrounding them. They're all parts of God's kingdom too, as if they have a parity with Israel, the nation that God had, in the Old Testament days. And you could see he would never have done that, just as he would not share his own heavenly space with all the gods of the nations. So that's the whole thing. And that's kind of in a way too tight nutshell what the theory is all about. I show not only where it says it, how it says it, and then some details showing that this is not just my own personal reading, that others have seen the same effect. And then finally, I even drill right down to the moment where the language that made this happen actually found its way into the text of what they promulgated on November 21, 1964.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Trace
So,
all that.
so basically in your book, you move beyond listing grievances on focusing on personalities instead of emphasize theological implications by building a systematic theological argument. What do you hope readers ultimately take away about the nature of truth and authority in the church?
Well, the key thing here is the church, if the real church doesn't lose its authority, but now since it's the faithful remnant that comprises that real church, they're the real and legitimate authority figures in the church, while these characters that are running stuff from Vatican City and promulgating all this, let's go all warm and fuzzy with every god of the nations we can think of, they don't speak for the church at all. So, I mean, they are technically what is to be called heretics, and a heretic cannot hold an office in the Catholic Church. That's another dogma, basically, and especially not as a pope. To be a pope in heresy is if you had that office, you would have lost it. But the more common belief is that probably you would have to have lost your membership in the papacy, to be able to do that, because the Holy Ghost, protects you from that.
Definitely. So the concept of sede vacante, vacante can be unsettling, even frightening. How do you reconcile this position with the church's claim of defectibility, and divine guidance?
So the divine guidance obviously seems to still be there, in the sense that we knew enough, and I say we, I mean really a lot of traditional Catholics, both cleric and lay, knew enough to pick up and continue as far as they've been able to so far. And so they didn't know, all the stuff I figured out. They just kind of knew we need to keep going with what works, what's right, what we'd been taught before. We need to keep that alive. And to keep the church going, however long this has to go on like this, it is enough to do that. So that's what we've been doing all this time. So, but to know that's still kind of divine guidance. It's the power of the Holy Ghost. So, but that's where the real authority in the church remains. The church has always had authority. That is a dogma. But if somebody steps out, so like let's go back to that 1054, the patriarch there in Constantinople had been kind of the big cheese over all of his entire particular part of the church while he was still a patriarch within the Catholic Church. When he decided he was only the Pope had more power than him. And the Pope's power is kind of distributed among everybody else. So he's more of the detail man for his area. Now, all of a sudden, he's not under the Pope anymore. So he's his own little emperor, if you will. He could do his own thing. And the moment that happened, all of the divine protections disappeared. And with that, also the authority. Now, people don't know that. They may continue on as if they think he has an authority. That same thing happened in England when there was the Anglican schism. Same thing. It looked the same. It felt the same. In fact, you had all the same priests and bishops in their same churches and cathedrals and so forth, in all the same places. You even have baptismal records that had been started under the Catholic Church and are now being continued by the same people under what is no longer Catholic auspices. And it gives this incredible illusion of continuity that, in fact, does not exist. So
yeah,
you lose authority when you lose that accountability. That's basically it, though, in a nutshell.
yeah, and I totally see this in so many ways. You connect the roots of today's crisis to the Second Vatican Council, which I could talk about for a lot of time with your knowledge base to kind of really picture all this. In your view, what specific theological shifts during that period account for Sede Vacante circumstance from a doctrinal and ecclesiological framework?
So, what technically makes it so that you're not a pope? All right, by definition, to be a pope, you are set over the entire church. There can't be so much as one truly Catholic soul known to the church who you do not have papal authority over. You see, there can't be anybody. So the moment you say, well, I don't have any authority over this group of people, whatever it may be, or that group of people over there, which is more like what happened in Vatican II, is, well, I'm going to make them part of the church, even though they don't take me as their pope, they don't take my guidance, they don't answer to me, but I'm going to count them as part of the church. Either way, what you've got is a pope who does not have authority over the whole church. Now, if you don't have authority over the whole church, just some part of it, then at most you could be like some archbishop or maybe even the patriarch of a particular rite or something, but you can't be the pope. And this shows up because infallibility requires the ability to teach the whole church on faith or morals or any combination thereof, and you're binding it like irrevocably. This is what is to be believed. Our Lady was assumed into heaven, and that is what is to be believed as a Catholic. And so, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. The expression would be Rome has spoken, the cause is finished. So no more talking about, was Mary, assumed into heaven? Was she conceived without sin? These are things that have happened in fairly recent times, the last couple hundred years or less. And these things were defined. And once they're defined, there's no going back. But what protected that? That they were popes. They had the whole church. They told the whole church, this is what we believe as Catholics, and that's it. But you can't do that if you're just part of the church.
So you basically, I didn't know this. They eliminated some of the authority the Pope had.
Yeah, by basically adding various other things to the church, like the other, non-Catholic Christians, and then other religions, the Jews, the Buddhists, you name it. You see, they're now parts. These different groups are now what they call the ecclesiastical means for the salvation of souls, or another way to put it in philosophical terms, efficient cause. The Buddhist church, their ashram, or the various Protestant churches are now bringing salvation, the salvation, to their members. That's the claim in Vatican II. That's saying they're part of the church, but they don't answer to, the Pope in Rome or any figure like him. They don't answer to that. The Anglicans are going to do their own things, and so are the Lutherans and Presbyterians, and you name it. they're going to, because they don't answer the Pope. A lot of these people don't even believe that there's supposed to be anything like a Pope.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and yet, yeah, it's
See,
like you
I
think,
didn't know that in my studies that the Pope lost power after Vatican II. Didn't know that.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
so if the Pope decided to write something before it became law, now it has to go through a lot more governing bodies to happen.
There are governing bodies involved, but even with all, but those governing bodies still only pertain to his own society. So he could tell what the, well, I'll call it, say, Novus Ordo apparatus members, the members of what mistakenly many still think of as a Catholic Church, as he can tell them what to think, and if they're gullible enough to follow him, they will. I mean, you can get some things right, some things wrong. That's not the same thing as getting the truth.
Got it.
Even if
Okay.
some things are correct, and some things are, but other things are not. It's all truth mixed with error, error mixed with truth, and
Okay.
so you don't have anything reliable over there. And it's why should it be? It's not the church. They basically redefined themselves that way. So something inside, partially inside and partially outside, is the church. Like I say, that's Vatican II speak for, we're not the church anymore. This other group is the church. There's an overlap. There's some members of that society who are members of ours and some who are not. And
Gotcha.
no guarantee that everybody in our society is also a Catholic, by the way, although that's more parenthetical and not immediately obvious.
And before Vatican II, certain things, if you called yourself a Catholic yet didn't follow the Catholic teachings, you would be gone. You would
Well, you
not
would
be able to
call a bad
receive
Catholic,
communion.
you're the same
You
as the
you would
guy
not
who,
be able to receive communion. You wouldn't
well,
have
you shouldn't,
specific
yeah,
things. Yeah.
yeah. That's right. You
Mhm.
shouldn't. I mean, it'd just be an additional sin if you hypocritically did take the communion. When they're handing it out, they don't know who you are, maybe, or they might
Right.
not.
But if they don't do, meaning politicians that
Yeah,
don't follow the church teachings but call themselves Catholic, which we know of those,
yeah,
that would have been a different story before Vatican II. Got it.
absolutely. Excommunication. It's
And that doesn't happen anymore. Yeah.
yeah. Well,
So
they call it a bad Catholic. Okay, you call yourself a Catholic, but you're not living it. You're like the guy who believes in the Ten Commandments, but he still cheats on his wife.
got it. I got it. So if your conclusions are correct, the implications are profound for millions of Catholics worldwide. What responsibility do you feel as an author presenting such a paradigm shifting perspective?
Well, it is a bit of a shock, and I understand that. And I kind of feel for people who, oh, I've gone to church here for years and years. All my friends go here. We've had wonderful prayerful things, and even our devotions have been kind of neat. And I come to enjoy the music, even, and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of shocking to realize you're going to have to go away, but from all of that. And I thought I had it here, but okay, I'm going to have to remember what I had in mind for that. But
No. Yeah.
basically, why was I obliged to do what I did? It's because I have seen traditional Catholics struggling with just the sheer enormity of what has taken place. And if you
Yeah.
don't have the theory, or at least a theory, you're really kind of just trying to do the right thing in the dark, early, as I illustrated earlier. If you're going through your room in the dark and you trip over your own furniture. And that's what it's
Totally.
like. It's hard to see what you're doing. You try to do the right thing, but you don't know where you are, and people collide with each other, and sometimes even get in totally unnecessary fights with each other. And there needs to be, to see the way through it, how the
Yeah.
fog lamp that can cut through it all and help us see where we're going. And to have
Totally.
been granted that, to me, it'd be criminal of me to keep it to myself.
Totally. So critics often, we know critics often argue that sede vaticanism, like Vatican, right? Vaticanism, I'm
Sede
trying my
Vacante,
best,
yeah.
risks fragmentation or schism. How do you respond to concerns that your position could deepen division within the church?
Well, I think I had that one. Let's see. I used once, and I'll say this here too. Think of the Statue of Liberty. We know who made it. We know when they made it. We know when they gave it to our country. We know where it is. We know where it stands. We know what it's supposed to symbolize, and probably most specifically to all those immigrants processing their way into this country on Ellis Island as, immigrants and so forth. And they could see as they're going there and waiting in line, there's this magnificent Statue of Liberty symbolizing in its way the freedoms that they've come here to participate in. And that's what it's all about. But one night, David Copperfield had an audience on either Ellis Island or one of those islands there. And they looked out there, and there's a big backdrop. There's the Statue of Liberty. Then the curtain went up, and after a couple minutes of minor entertainments, the curtain went back down, and the Statue of Liberty was gone. How did that happen? Well, without going into the details of how a magician pulls that off, we know, of course, it has to be stage magic. I won't get into that. It is a known thing if somebody wants to dig for it, but in respect to the magician's code, I'm not going to do that here. But basically, it was all an illusion. Obviously, the Statue of Liberty did not move. As they looked out there, they saw nothing. They could even see some of the stars of the night sky beyond it, a helicopter buzzing around in the sky like a highway patrol helicopter. But how did he do it? And you can imagine people arguing with it. Oh, there's a big subterranean chamber it went down into. Oh, giant helicopter lifted it away. And, oh, there was something else in between that simulated the stars in the background. And you can come up with, a bunch of different explanations. And let's say they get really kind of caught up in these ways to explain it, none of which are actually how the trick was done, by the way. But if people can argue over that. But no one is arguing over what it means, what it symbolizes, who it was made for, and why, and all of that.
Yeah.
And that's what it is to be a traditional Catholic. We know what our faith is. We know what we're fighting for. We know what our Mass is. And we know what our catechisms are. You yourself brought up the Baltimore Catechism. And by the way, the church had its own official catechism before that one you read, and it didn't impress you, as I recall.
But yes, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Yeah. Go ahead.
This is what they had before that. It's called the Catechism of the Council of Trent.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. This is what the church had basically as the church's official catechism, as distinct from other official documents, until they decided to replace it with this, which is, I assume, what you read those couple of times or more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Wow. Okay. some very interesting stuff. We're getting close to running out of time, but I'm going to try to jump to the next question. Where things stand now, what do you believe is the path forward for faithful Catholics seeking clarity, stability, and truth in what you described as a time of deep ecclesiastical confusion?
So the important thing is doctrinal clarity first and foremost. And you find that with the traditionalist Catholics. And in my resurrection book, I point people to a place where there's actually like a directory. It lists directly the ones in the United States, Canada, but it also lists contacts for other countries or where to go for information. So you can find this stuff for around the world. And it's a site, it's not my site. There's a priest who's been managing this since 1994, believe it or not. It's called Traditio, TRADITIO.com, traditio.com, and it has a directory of all the masses. And the best thing you can do is find one that you can visit or make a pilgrimage to, and go there, see the mass, meet the people, and if by any chance you can, have a conversation with the priest. And they may have books sometimes for sale. Some of those books can get you started on a lot of good general information. So if you learn all of this kind of stuff and see it, then you want to try to commit your life to that, and you follow that. You say, I want to be a Catholic. Well, here's how to do it.
Right.
Now, that's the first part. So the first step is, I think more Catholics need to know how to be Catholic so that we don't waste time with these people that are, leading us astray.
Right. And I think that's key. Absolutely key. So survival as Catholics, as a Catholic in our day, is obviously a key part of your solution you preach. Looking ahead, what do you see as long-term solution to the present situation?
Well, the most likely scenario is that traditional Catholics, the more the truths are recognized about just how far things have strayed, the more they get recognized, the more we will grow. And I think we're also coming into a time where I think people are starting to rediscover tradition. You know, you even mentioned some recent Vatican leaders that seem to be, well, pretending to take some steps in that direction, or maybe they kind of do, but they're nowhere near going the distance. And so they're kind of responding to something that I think is a rising momentum. So the traditional Catholic grows, gets more able to recognize itself for what it is, and becomes able to act as a group, as a community. And basically, since we are the church, it's up to among ourselves, actually our leadership, our bishops and so forth, to elect the next pope. And once that happens, that pope will be infallible, and we will take the appropriate actions from there. Now, there's another scenario that some people were hoping for, and I can't rule it out, but it's like what I once said. It's like, you know, could America resubmit itself to the British crown as so many colonies of England? It's not physically impossible, but what are the odds of that? Yeah, but it's not physically impossible. And that's how I kind of see it. What if the people in charge of Vatican City actually would wake up one day and repent, realize, hey, I'm going to meet my maker today, and I'm going to have an awful lot, a hell of a lot, and I mean that unit of measurement, to account for if I don't repent and start trying to shape things up. And let's say they really, really, really do. What should that person do? Well, first of all, they've got to, cancel all the bad stuff, cancel Vatican II, basically, and
Right, exactly. Yeah.
and work with the traditional, bishops and priests and leaders
Right.
that have been keeping the faith, and those are the people who should be set over, main areas of the church as people who
All
can
right.
depend on to do the right thing, and eventually you could put it together from the top down.
All right. Perfect. Yeah. I mean, such great stuff. I could talk to you for hours. I know I'm going to have you for another interview on one of your other books. I look forward to that because you're very knowledgeable. And I could see that you put so much time and effort into your books. Where can we purchase this book? Best place?
Simplest is just Amazon. Look up my name, Griff Ruby, and especially under books, that pretty much gets, the first things that'll come up will be my books. So it'll be the Resurrection book or my Sede Vacantes, books 1 and 2, and that'll be the first thing that comes up. And anything else has nothing to do with me so far.
All right. Well, appreciate it, Griff. Great stuff. Appreciate it, sir. Thanks for stopping by.
All right. Appreciate we having this interview.
You're welcome.
All right.
You're listening
All
and
right.
watching the Neil Haley Show, and we'll be back in just a moment.